Hello. Welcome to another episode of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. Each week we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season we're going to be focusing on horror subgenres and how they've changed over time. Hope you enjoy it, and thanks for listening. All right, we're back with another episode in Season 13 in our mini-series about zombies.
One of my favorite miniseries of all time. Top 13.
Is it the only one we've done so far?
I don't know. I haven't been paying attention for the past 6 years.
Fair. I also realized we had a huge missed opportunity. We should have called this season the 13th.
Oh.
Right?
Dang.
Too obvious, but
yeah.
Anyway, hindsight's 2020. Yeah, this time we're doing like a 5-episode stretch talking about the history of the zombie subgenre of horror movies. Mm-hmm. Last week we talked about the movie White Zombie. This week we're talking about the movie Night of the Living Dead. Night of the Living Dead is widely considered to be a large turning point for zombies in movies. Like, it basically changed what was popular for the genre and established a lot of the kind of zombie formula that is still popular today. And so this week we're really going to dig into kind of like what led up to this and then like what it introduced that was so game changing. And before we do that, I kind of want to get into some of the history. And I know normally we start off, talking very specifically about this one movie, but I think to really understand why Night of the Living Dead is important for zombie horror movies, we kind of have to understand like how we got there. Like what is the environment that created this and why was it such a turning point? So I did something that I know you don't approve of, and that is quite a bit of reading.
I marry a nerd and my best friend's a nerd. What is going on?
Yeah. Your wife definitely read more pages of books this week than me, but mine were a lot more focused on horror.
That's true. Yeah.
So yeah, just citing my sources a bit. There is a book called The Art of Horror, and it was edited by Stephen Jones. And that is really, really interesting because it kind of breaks down subgenres and focuses on like the art for like the movie posters and stuff and kind of the visuals and stuff that go into that. But it also contains a lot of like historical information about like how those genres developed over time. So that was a great source. I also read some stuff in Cinema Blend and Paste Magazine, which honestly, both websites, not books. And then, of course, our old friend Wikipedia. So, based on all that information and stuff that I've read and heard before, here is a brief history of how we got from the beginning of the idea of zombies in the United States to the game changer that was Night of the Living Dead. The idea of zombies in the U.S. really started with West African superstition that migrated to the Caribbean, specifically the sugar plantations of Haiti. And that was kind of like the environment for our earliest exposure to it in film. Out of that environment came the novel The Magic Island by William Seabrook in 1929, which was a direct influence for movies like White Zombie, which we covered last week, and I Walked with a Zombie, which we covered in an earlier season. The book and these movies, and there was also a Broadway play at the time, really popularized the idea of the Walking Dead in American culture, sort of built out of the mythology and the superstition that came from the Caribbean. And that's really the template that movies followed for quite a while. But movies aren't the only place where zombies were popular in American culture. In the 1950s, EC Comics' Tales from the Crypt kind of took the idea of the zombie and disconnected it from voodoo. It had a lot of comics and storylines that were focused on the idea of like the dead coming back to life. And so you had a lot of, sort of decayed people coming out of the ground in graveyards and stuff like that. And then there were several other attempts to develop the ideas of zombies in the late 60s and early 70s. But really the biggest game changer was when the independent movie Night of the Living Dead was released in 1968. Sometime in the 1960s, George Romero and John Rousseau, who were co-founders of a film company called The Latent Image, started co-writing a story about The Walking Dead. From what I can tell, John Rousseau mainly contributed the idea about recently dead people coming back to life, and Romero contributed a lot of the larger ideas about the environment in which the story took place. Romero was influenced by Richard Matheson's 1954 novel I Am Legend. In an interview with Marion McConnell, he said that he basically ripped off a lot of the ideas from that novel, but didn't want to do vampires because it had already been done. So this was kind of like a natural place to work in Rousseau's idea about these Walking Dead and into that environment. And so the idea of Walking Dead was like his equivalent of like the way that Matheson used the vampires in I Am Legend. But he was really intrigued by the idea of what it would have been like at the beginning. So I Am Legend tells the story of basically like a dystopian, dark, apocalyptic future where there's one man left alive and he's surrounded by these vampires. And so Romero's idea was, why don't we go back to the very beginning where the apocalypse or the plague or whatever first started? And that's what Night of the Living Dead culminated from.
That's really interesting, man.
Yeah.
I think
that was a whole lot of reading summarized into not as much reading.
Wow, that's true. I like it. I think the thing, one of my first experiences with zombies, actually, I feel like now wasn't Night of the Living Dead. It was the Omega Man, which was based off of I Am Legend, the novel, with Charlton Heston. My dad, huge fan of that. I didn't think they were zombies because they talked, but
he likes the way I talk.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. It's a good film. But it's really interesting how they kind of, I guess how it developed. I feel like maybe with like Frankenstein or vampires, it was kind of established. This was like, we're going to develop this into something. And then it kind of branches off into just a few different other specialties. I'm talking with zombies specifically. You know, there's the fast and the slow and all that, just to simplify it. But it's just amazing how it started with that and ended where we're at now with like, you know, World War Z films or, you know, Train to Busan.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that if you take a look sort of across the spectrum at zombie movies today, really they all kind of converge back to Night of the Living Dead, much more so than back to anything that came before it. So that's really what we'll get into, like with the rest of this miniseries. But Night of the Living Dead is really just kind of amazing to me the more that I've read about it because of the impact that it had on like the whole popular conception. Like I think of it almost like Bram Stoker's novel about Dracula back in the day, where vampires went from this very like, almost like you think of them as like monsters or something like almost more like animals or something than people, to everybody has this super clear mental idea of what a vampire is because that novel defined it in a way that was so like captivating that just all the media from that point forward kind of springs from that, with a few exceptions obviously, but you know, broad strokes.
Yeah.
So yeah, next week we'll definitely come back and talk more about John Rousseau, but this week we're going to focus on George Romero's style of zombie that started in Night of the Living Dead, but then was continued in Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, and on and on and on. So yeah, it was fun to go back and watch this movie again, and I'm excited to talk about it with you.
It's just a damn classic. When I say Halloween feeling movie, this is what I mean.
Yeah.
I just gotta get that out there.
Absolutely. So I will do a quick intro just for anybody that's not familiar with kind of the high level of it, and then we'll get into the gory details. In 1968, Continental Distributing brought us Night of the Living Dead, a groundbreaking zombie horror film written by George Romero and John Rousseau and directed by George Romero. This movie tells the story of a group of people hiding out in a farmhouse during a zombie apocalypse and fighting for survival. Night of the Living Dead was made on a budget of about $120,000 and made around $30 million at the box office. It has spawned countless sequels and remakes and inspired generations of zombie filmmakers. It can currently be streamed on HBO Max, Peacock, Amazon Prime Video, or Tubi. So in general, before we get into more of the guts of this movie very much feels like it's from the late 60s.
Yeah.
I could not, I had a thought that I couldn't unthink, and then, everything I saw afterward just confirmed it for me. But this whole movie is basically just a super gory, long episode of The Twilight Zone, and I think that may be one reason you and I love it so much.
Yeah, 1,000%. There's no denying it. That's exactly the case. Just, even seeing, the black and white old cars, it's just something about that just makes me feel so good.
And kind of the eeriness and the type of suspense and then the twist at the end, they're Rod Serling should have introduced and wrapped up this movie.
Yeah, legit surprised that he didn't show up somewhere into the making of this.
Yeah.
That was exactly what a Twilight Zone episode would be, I feel like. Minus, like you were saying, minus the gore and stuff, but.
Yeah. So this one I know that we've done an episode on in the past.
Yeah.
And so what I really would like to focus on are some of the things that are zombie tropes or this is the first time that a thing happened that you've seen copied a billion times in other movies. But before we get into that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the more memorable scenes. And an experience that I've had in the past while we're on the topic of me being a nerd and reading too much is going back and rereading the first Harry Potter book. It's every chapter name is a key component that you forgot was just a chapter on its own that was introduced for the first time at one point. So it's there's a chapter called The Sorting Hat, and you're oh yeah, that used to be a thing we didn't know about. But then as you're going through it, you're just oh yeah, all these things that I remember and that I've kind of taken for granted for a long time. It's just this movie's playing the hits. And the scenes, even thinking about it back after the fact, because I shared with you, my laptop died with all of my notes about this movie, so I had to recreate them. And I didn't rewatch the movie, but I did try to write down some of the scenes. And I remembered a lot of them. This movie is just basically one classic scene after another.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. It's I don't know if I could pinpoint the favorite after... I think there's a couple of things. We watched the Night of the Living Dead, I don't know how long ago, but we watched so many horror films since then that I haven't enjoyed, that it just makes me enjoy this one more. I'm not saying I haven't enjoyed all of the ones. I'm just saying Under the Skin's been since then. Do you know what I mean?
A ghost story.
A ghost story. Sarah. You get cut. But yeah, so it's almost like watching it with a smile. I was sitting there just kind of excited and comfortable while watching, and it's well, this scene, I love this one. I love even the first one. I think I was maybe getting a little annoyed with the "Coming to Get You, Barbara," but I've been saying that since I've watched the film, rewatched it, before this. So I don't know how to explain it, but this is just a amazing, or it was just well put together film.
Well, and I think it holds up super well. I still think this is a really well written, well directed movie that holds up.
Well, and one thing you were saying earlier that just kind of how it defined, one of the defining moments with zombies. I think it also goes with films in horror films in general. With this wasn't a huge set that they were at. It wasn't they were minus all the zombies, there wasn't a huge main cast. And so it was almost a formula there where it was these studios don't want to produce the cash to make these films. We're going to do it our damn selves. And knowing that you don't have to have a huge studio behind you to get it done. And so I think that was another thing, even though that doesn't have to do with zombies, that I just think is really important with this piece. I don't think they went in thinking they were going to change it, but it definitely did. Without this, we wouldn't have the Evil Dead. We wouldn't have, I really don't think we would personally, but.
Yeah. And I think there were some things that it did really well just as a horror movie that have been emulated a bunch of times since. And I don't really know if this was the first one to kind of do that. But one thing that I feel like it did a good job of was like increasing the horror as time went on. Because when it first started, you really were just dealing with like one zombie in the graveyard.
Yeah.
And it was like, for all you knew, the two main characters were being attacked by a guy who was just creepy. Like, he didn't really have any superpowers or anything. He just was attacking them for some reason that they didn't understand. And like, yeah, Johnny got his head, he got knocked out, but it's because he hit his head when he fell, not because this guy was just so overwhelmingly strong. And then Barbara was, physically smaller, but she got away from him. And so you're like, wow, that's a really creepy encounter. But then all of a sudden she gets to the house and all of a sudden there are more of them, a few more. And Ben's there and Ben's able to like fight them off, and it's like close, but they're kind of slow and he's stronger than they are. And you're like, yeah, well, they stand a chance at winning this. But then when it's like 10 of them outside, you're like, all right, odds are getting a little worse, but then they find more people inside the house and it's like, well, they might be able to make a run for it. And when there's like 100 zombies outside the house, you're just like, oh crap, the game has changed,
Yeah. Yeah. I think the thing with slow zombies that you have to have is just the bulk. Otherwise it's just like, I could just keep walking. I could just keep speed walking and you're screwed. That's what you have to have. And so, yeah, I think like you're saying, like as the film got more intense because of that exact reasoning. That's one way to build some damn suspense, I feel like.
Well, and then I feel like, it's like eventually that idea kind of peters out. Like once you're surrounded by too many zombies to fight off, like adding more zombies doesn't really make it that much scarier.
Yeah.
So when they were trying to escape and then you see just that like super gory, ferocious scene of the zombies eating Tom and Judy.
Yeah.
And like the body parts and like the bones and stuff. It was just so visceral. And so like the way they filmed that with the camera, like right up in the middle of it and stuff. I don't know of another movie from the time period that really got that intense with it. And that made all of a sudden, like, it went from this psychological fear of we're surrounded to a very real fear of I might get ripped apart. Yeah. And that I thought was just so effectively pulled off with so little in the way of like special effects or technology. It was amazing.
Yeah. And I think all along, like, dealing with that and the internal strife that's going on inside, that's the thing I think people have to keep remembering about zombies is a lot of the stuff that you find in films. Yeah, it's about zombies, but it's about the internal struggle, the struggle with the living that they're going through. Just think of like Dawn of the Dead, with the security guards, and it was just a whole, that was like a whole thing in that film, so that's the other piece. And I know I feel like it's fair to tie this to zombie films because this is really where it's really prevalent. Could you say it for me?
Prevalent.
So the only other time I could really think of one just off the top of my head was 30 Days of Night. They kind of dealt with something like that, but they were all locked in as well.
Yes. Yeah.
But still.
Well, and I think that that's definitely a thing we get into with horror movies in like the 2000s and 2010s is you see a lot of like mixing and matching of like subgenre tradition, kind of doing the same types of, using the same things from other subgenres that make them effective in like, different elements or like mixing in like the different type of creature or whatever.
Yeah, that's good. Cool.
And so, another one is like, what was it called? It was The Fog, where they're like all trapped in the grocery store.
Mm-hmm. I think that's what it was called. Or Mist.
Is it The Fog or The Mist? I get those two backwards, but anyway.
Is it the
one
same
of those,
thing?
like, I mean, I'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. And then, another scene I had in there was just the one with, Karen, the Cooper's daughter, in the basement when she came back to life, because nothing in the movie really like foreshadowed that.
Yeah.
I didn't think,
Sorry. No, it definitely didn't. And that's something that's been used in a ton of zombie films since then as well, with the trying to, hide all that going down. So for me, like with the scenes, I just keep it kind of brief. Mine was like any basement situation kind of going on. Because that's the internal strife. The thing I think I kind of liked about it, or this one, just trying to think of like a little bit different scene. It's just when Ben, who like saves Barbara early on, arrives in the pickup and just like fights off the zombie. Mm-hmm. Like I just like that aspect because it's like it's just all business. It's just take care of this now. Trying to get them to start boarding up the door. There's just that you're still, I feel like you're still trying to figure out like what the hell is exactly going on here. And you're like, Ben knows. Or Ben might not know, but he's smart enough to know I need to keep these things out. So let's board up, it's like, let's get into action.
And I thought it was a really interesting contrast between him and Barbara.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's almost like the two extremes of the way people deal with things. And one is to get like super practical and the other is to just like completely shut down. And I think that the whole like showing the way that different people are reacting to this scenario is a key part of like the zombie apocalypse movie. And then that's the thing that kind of ends up fueling a lot of the like conflict and stuff where like, oh yeah, now people are more scared of each other or equally scared of or threatened by each other as they are the zombies. And that's a key part of the tension of these movies.
Yeah.
And so to have like from the beginning, just those two there together, taking like the complete opposite approaches, I thought was just brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. There's other aspects into this film that I didn't really think of initially was, like it's 1968, we're used to having information immediately.
Yeah.
Within like 30 seconds, I feel like, it's just like everyone wants to tell you the new news that's out there. I don't get that.
Yeah.
Or like if a celebrity died, they text you like, hey, so-and-so died. And you're like, okay. It's like, anyway, they're getting this news, from radio. Like it's not like a constant, so there's still that piece of like, we need to figure out what the hell to do. But if I'm in Oklahoma and you're in Texas and we're experiencing a zombie apocalypse happening and I kill a zombie by like shooting at its head, I'm texting my homie in Texas and saying, hey, shoot him in the head, you immediately know what to do. And so that's a piece that I hope we never really kind of lose with these films where it's like, I already have the struggle, like so-and-so, or like all these people passed out in theaters because this movie was so scary in the 30s. Like I struggle with that piece, but give me the 60s. Like I can make sense of that at least. But
yet
again, that's more so just with the time, not necessarily with the zombies. That's my bad, but, or the Walking Dead. But, that's just one piece too that you got to tie into this information.
Indeed. So yeah, like we've kind of been, I feel like we've been like dancing around it this whole time, but like there were a lot of things from this movie that just became almost instant classics of the zombie subgenre that have either inspired or been directly copied over and over and over the last 60 years almost. And at this point, I feel like a lot of times you can just kind of take it for granted. Like it's almost just seen as part of like zombie lore and not really like as a thing that was influenced by this movie. Like you think, oh yeah, I'm just making a zombie movie and there's this long history of zombie movies and this is part of it. But it's like, there were a lot of things in this one that maybe aren't as obvious that you just would completely take for granted today. And one of those, kind of getting to your point, talking about the technology and stuff, like in the beginning, it takes everybody by surprise. like nobody has any idea what's going on or what to do. And there's this period of just like confusion and trying to come to terms with the new reality and trying to get information, but also being limited in where you can go or what you can do. And even though different movies have taken different approaches to that, or like why that's happening, or, sort of the very inception point of the zombie apocalypse, it really comes back to this is a thing that happens suddenly and nobody really knows what's going on or why. And that intro to a zombie movie really just sets a compelling and scary scene for all of the rest of it to play out. And that's something that this one did. It would have been a totally different thing if everybody immediately got a radio broadcast saying exactly what had happened and what people needed to do, you know?
Yeah, without a doubt. I forgot that they called them ghouls in this film too, but yeah, I think that the other amazing thing that this provides is the not so happy ending.
Oh yeah,
that's sure. Carried on. It's not in every horror film, but if it is in a horror film, it's definitely probably one of our top favorites. we don't like the happy endings. That's why we're watching horror films.
And that's definitely in contrast to a lot of the early movies as well. Like even, like with White Zombie that we talked about last week, like even though that was a horror movie and there was a very clear, very iconic bad guy, he did not win at the end. Right. And so I don't know that this was the first movie that did that, but definitely, it was a popular one that did.
Yeah. The other thing too that I think that this movie actually had a little bit more of a benefit from was it could be being that it was black and white, but the differentiating between the living and non-living was just a lot more difficult than what you see nowadays. Like, for example, 28 Days Later, you see someone just run super fast and look at you like they want to like tear you apart.
Yeah.
That's not like a normal thing,
Yeah.
So you're like, okay, that's a zombie. That's a bad guy. With this one, the benefit that they had was for the most part, I'm not saying all, but they had some normal looking zombies there, which could trick people into getting bit because they don't know what's going on. Like that was something that is just a little bit special. If you walk up to me drooling, your face like partway melting off, then I know you're not normal and I'm not going to let you get close to me. I'm not a doctor or a nurse. I'm not here to save you. Like just for the record, anyone that comes up to me, if you're acting like that, then I'm going to be getting you away from me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think another thing that was kind of unique or was an influence from this that became just, ubiquitous with zombie movies is like the swarm. Like the idea that there's almost an unlimited number of zombies out there. Yeah. And so it's like the longer you're in the house, the more of them show up. Like they're not moving on. Like it's just more and more and more. And so like it's a thing that's spreading and making it like contagious and like theoretically could overtake the whole earth. Yeah. And that is definitely not a thing that was in any of the like voodoo type zombie movies, at least the ones that we've seen or read about.
That's true.
But I think is like core to the genre.
Yeah. And I think a difference between this version and like current zombie films as well is like, I feel like the thinking nowadays is like get out of the city, get to the country, away from people. But with this one, even though it was kind of out in the middle of nowhere, just the thought of like, how the hell did all these slow zombies get here? Like, it's just a little bit different. I think that goes back to the filmmaking and doing with what they had. But yeah, I feel like if there is a zombie apocalypse, I'm going to get as far away from people as possible. Yeah. Because you're always going to have those people in the basement that, want to act like they didn't get bit. Yeah. And I stand firm on this statement that I will kill any zombie. You got bit? You think you got bit? You're out. Yeah. I'm firm, but I'm fair.
Yes. And so that was actually a little bit ahead. But one of the things that I wanted to point out that was lacking from this movie that has become part of kind of the long-term view of zombie movies, is that tension of like somebody got bit and now they're like still human for a while, and you have to decide like, when do I kill the person? Or like, when do they start becoming a real danger to me? Like, I feel like that tension is a thing that exists in almost every zombie movie I've ever seen. But in this one, so like Karen had been bitten, but then she basically just went like into a coma, and they had no reason to think that she was going to change. Yeah. So there was never that point where they're like, oh no, what do? We have to make a decision. Like, do we kill her now, or is she going to attack us? Like, that wasn't a thing.
That's actually super interesting, because I have the feeling watching that, knowing what happens.
Yes.
When you're bit now, because of how long it's been.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I didn't even think of it like that. I thought of it the opposite way, where like they started it because of that, but that's definitely not. Huh.
Yeah. Well, and I think that one of the most important things that this did contribute long term is just that idea that when you get bit, you too turn into a zombie. Mm-hmm. So it's not just the idea of I might get eaten is the danger, but I might get like partially eaten and then turned and like become one of these like mindless monsters. Yeah. And the psychological impact of that, I feel like, really adds another level to it. And that idea of really making it like a thing that can spread rapidly, because if it was just zombies eating brains and moving on, then like eventually they're going to eat all the brains and then they're like all going to die. Right. Like that's how it ends.
Animals.
But if it's, well, true. Yeah. Yeah. But this idea of like, not only do you get killed, but you basically become reanimated in a lesser state of being, is just like some heavy shit, man. Yeah, like that's really dark. And the idea that this movie introduced that, and now that's like one of the fundamental like psychological grabs of the subgenre, I think that's huge.
Do you think it would be scarier if you didn't figure out what was causing it? Do you like?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. So like the one thing I did like about this one was they kind of like vaguely alluded to a satellite that had been to Venus and then broke up in the atmosphere, and like maybe that's what was causing this. I love that they didn't try to get more specific than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it does. I think for me it does make it more scary. I think the scary part's not knowing. Once you know, then you're like, okay, I could just avoid it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, anywho, that's basically all I had in my notes that I rewrote after losing all my notes. So, anything else you wanted to cover?
No, I gotta say, you did great.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
I was just really, really excited to do this, and I feel like
it's one of the best.
After the last 6 years of us doing this, coming back to this movie and feeling like I just appreciate it on a whole new level.
Same.
Really is like good confirmation for why we're doing what we do here, and it's fun, and I appreciate you being on this journey with me.
Hey, listen, I am legend. I am Will Smith. Now that's how you let the beat build, bitch.
Get my wife's name out your mouth.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.